I mentioned menopause, and I want to come back to that now if we can, because I think that this sort of perimenopausal transition, along with menopause as well, like midlife can be very challenging. There's physiological changes that are happening. We're seeing a decline in sex hormones. There's insulin resistance. There's often body composition changes. Sleep is affected. You run the whole gamut. But particularly with midlife, I do find that there is, if you don't find a way to manage your stress, you said something just now which I liked. It's like, if you don't seek discomfort, discomfort will seek you. And I think that that's true in menopause as well. I think that we must become masters of mitigating and managing our stress, because we just have to assume that stuff is going to happen, the good, the bad, the very ugly, the very tragic, and the very sad. And we have to be able to figure out who we want to be and how we want to show up when those things happen. So let's talk a little bit about menopause, and certainly understanding, you're not a medical doctor. You're not doling out medical advice. There's no doctor-patient relationship here. But one of the things that we do see in menopause is this thermal dysregulation, right? So the common thing that women will say is, I'm running hot all of a sudden, like literally no reason. I'm having a hot flash, or I'm usually overnight. They'll say that they're running hot overnight. Is there any evidence, or are you aware, either with individuals that you've worked with or any literature that you may have perused on women in that perimenopausal and menopausal transition and using cold water therapy to help mitigate some of these changes in our ability to regulate our temperature?
Absolutely. And so there's a couple of things I'll talk about. I'll talk about some of the things that I've read and that I've seen with other people, and then I'll talk about my own personal experience as well.
Great.
I know that you live in Canada. I live in Canada too. We have 4 seasons. We're already doing cold exposure because we live in a country that has very extreme, temperatures.
Yep.
So when I look at some research, and when I read some of the things that I've been reading, the gist of what I'm gathering is that because we are able to be a little bit more adaptive to these extreme temperatures in a very short amount of time, that our system becomes a little bit more intelligent with how it's going to run on the inside. And so what does that mean? It means that people that practice, for example, exercise we've just talked about, sauna we might talk about later, but sauna is included in this because it's a temperature change. And cold exposure changes how our hormones behave in the system. So when our hormones behave differently, there's an opportunity there to become more regulated or more adaptive. So what I'm hearing is, especially on the Facebook groups, I jump on a lot of pages. There's a menopausal women and cold training page. There's all kinds of people that talk anecdotally about their experiences that when they were going through these types of changes, cold water really, really helped manage these symptoms of that temperature dysregulation. When I talk to people about my own personal experiences, it took me 3 or 4 winters to be able to go outside and actually not be bothered by these extreme temperatures. You've probably gone outside and you've been at a minus 20 Celsius with a wind coming at you outside, trying to get from one place to the next. And I was the last person that, if you had told me 20 years ago that I would be doing this, I just would have totally just laughed in your face. Like, there's no way you could have actually ever convinced me that I was going to be doing this. And one of the reasons why I started to do this is I was standing at a bus stop in February, and I guess there was a storm, and I didn't know that the bus wasn't going to come. I didn't know that the bus wasn't going to be able to get up the hill, and I wasn't going to be able to get home. And I was standing there wishing that I was any place else than right there. And I finally took a moment and I said to myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life wishing I was not where I was? How many more moments do I want to forfeit and saying, I just wish I was here. I wish I was there. I wish this wasn't part of my life. I wish this was different. And I just thought, I really want to embrace and accept and have fun with exactly where I am. I know life is full of suffering, but I want to suffer a little bit more intelligently. So how can I do that? And when I started taking cold showers, when I started taking ice baths, yes, it was challenging, but I definitely want to share some of the very interesting methods that I use to get around that. And as I just mentioned, after 3 or 4 winters, I was laughing because I couldn't really believe how my body was like, I got you now. We figured it out. You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to get into that fear state. We're going to adapt for you. And that's the best way that I can describe it. When you're in that situation and you feel nothing, and then you start laughing, you know your body has your back.
Yeah, and I think that one of the principles I would say for perimenopause and menopause is like the way that you treat your body now is how your body is going to treat you in the future. So, for you, it was 3 or 4 winters of probably consistent cold training. And now you're in what some might call like a brutal Canadian winter, with this bus not being able to make it up. And you're like, all right, I can figure this out. And I can tell you, I'll share a personal story as well. Last year, we did not use our winter coats. So I have been using the cold water immersion now for I guess it's been about a year. And last winter we didn't use I have my big Canada Goose thing, like the big blanket jacket with all the hats and the mitts and all the things. I didn't use any of it. And recently I was at a tournament. I made the mistake, what some might have been a fatal mistake. I thought that the tournament was indoors. So I just didn't bring a jacket. Like I just wore like my indoor clothes, and it was outdoors, and it was a Friday night, and it was freezing outside. And was I shivering? Yes. Was I doing lunges on the side of the pitch? Yes. But I still was able to manage 90 minutes or, plus halftime, whatever it was, like let's call it 100 minutes outside in very cold weather. I don't know exactly what the temperature was, but it was at least close to 0 in centigrade, around 30 degrees Fahrenheit for my Americans. It was cold. It was very cold. And I was shivering, and I was like, well, okay, well, that was my cold water immersion. After he was finished the game or whatever, like, well, I don't need to do cold water immersion because I just did like 100 minutes of it just now. But I felt like I was way more resilient making that error, not realize I thought it was indoor season, whatever, I made the mistake, whatever. And we ended up being outside, but I still had that cellular grit, that cellular resilience to like figure out what to do and to be able to kind of, I could have gone to the car and waited, I guess, but I chose to watch the game.
Do you know how many times I hear people tell me that at those particular moments, just like that their life totally changed forever for the better?
Yeah. There's like a psychological freedom. There's a psychological freedom with it. It's like, the cold, like, it's not going to get me. Like, I'll figure it out.
Yeah. And I think there's another thing I want to remind everyone too, because I love reminding myself, I'm healthy enough to get to do this. I'm healthy enough to be able to go outside or pull out, off my glove and use my phone in the dead of winter and not be thinking something negative about the situation, the circumstance, myself, another person. I think negativity, and I want to touch on that for sure when we get right into cold exposure. When we start attaching negativity to these practices, how much health are we actually really building? I don't think it's talked about enough that our mindset while we're doing pretty much everything is going to either raise up or fine-tune your immune system or continue to suppress it even if you're doing something that you think is healthy for you.
Yeah, it's like the have to versus the get to, right? It's like, oh, I have to do this thing, or I get to challenge myself. I get to become a better version of myself. I get to regulate my blood pressure and all the benefits that cold water immersion, which we'll talk about in a moment, can confer.